I was sitting in the driver's seat of my 10-year-old sedan in a grocery store parking lot in Central Florida, staring at the bright screen of my phone. The engine was off because I couldn't afford to waste the gas to run the air conditioning. My shirt was sticking to my back in the afternoon heat, but I barely noticed. All I could focus on was the banking app open on my screen. The number staring back at me was exactly $842. That was it. That was the sum total of my entire life's financial worth at 66 years old. I just sat there in the sweltering heat, listening to the cars drive by on the highway, feeling a kind of panic that is so deep and so profound it actually makes your hands go numb. I want you to really think about what that feels like. You spend your entire life following the rules. You wake up early, you go to work, you pay your taxes, you try to save what you can. You do everything society tells you to do to earn a safe, quiet retirement. And yet, there I was, 66 years old, realizing that I was one unexpected medical bill or one minor car repair away from being completely homeless. It wasn't supposed to end up this way. I wasn't a reckless person. I hadn't gambled my money away. I was just a regular American who got caught in the slow, crushing gears of the modern economy. Over the previous 5 years, I had watched everything slip away, little by little. First, it was the rent. My modest one-bedroom apartment went from $900 a month to over $1,500 a month in the span of just 3 years. My landlord sent a letter explaining it was just market adjustments, as if those 2 words were supposed to magically generate an extra $600 in my checking account every 30 days. Then it was the groceries, then the insurance, then a minor health issue that wasn't fully covered, eating up the last remaining chunk of my savings. Every single month my Social Security check would arrive, and within 4 days it was completely gone. I wasn't living. I was just existing in a state of constant, low-level financial terror, waiting for the other shoe to drop. That afternoon in the parking lot, I realized I had 2 choices. I could stay in America, watch my remaining $800 vanish into thin air, and eventually become a burden on a system that had already forgotten I existed. Or I could do something so reckless, so completely out of character, that most of my friends and family would think I had lost my mind. I chose the latter. I decided I was going to leave the United States. I spent the next 3 weeks obsessively researching on YouTube. I looked at Mexico, I looked at Panama, I looked at Portugal. But everywhere I looked, the barrier to entry seemed just a little too high for a guy with less than $1,000 to his name. And then, the YouTube algorithm showed me a video about a place I hadn't thought about in decades, a place that carried a lot of heavy history for a man of my generation, Vietnam. For a lot of older Americans, the word Vietnam brings up very specific, very painful associations. It was the war of our youth. But the videos I was watching didn't show a war-torn country. They showed bustling, incredibly modern cities. They showed pristine beaches. They showed massive bowls of steaming noodles for $2. But most importantly, they showed Americans my age living with absolute dignity on a fraction of what it costs to simply survive in the United States. I saw people talking about renting beautiful apartments for under $300 a month. I saw them talking about a culture that deeply respects the elderly. The more I watched, the more a crazy idea started to take root in my mind. I didn't have months to plan this. I didn't have the luxury of taking a 2-week scouting trip to see if I liked the weather. I had $800 and a ticking clock on my apartment lease. So I sold everything that wouldn't fit into one large suitcase and one backpack. I sold my television, my furniture, and finally I sold my car to a used dealership down the street. I took the cash from the car, bought a one-way ticket to Da Nang, Vietnam, and put the rest in my bank account to cover the visa and my first month of expenses. By the time I paid for the flight, I was right back down to roughly $800 in available cash. Walking through the airport on the day of my flight was the most surreal experience of my life. People were rushing past me, going on vacations, going on business trips, entirely unaware that the older man walking quietly with a battered suitcase was essentially jumping out of an airplane without a parachute. I had no backup plan. If I failed in Vietnam, there was no house to return to. There was no car to sleep in. This had to work. The flight took over 24 hours, and I don't think I slept for a single minute of it. When the plane finally touched down in Da Nang, the anxiety was completely consuming me. I stepped out of the airport, and the heat hit me instantly. It was a thick, heavy, tropical heat that wraps around you the second you walk through the sliding glass doors. The noise was deafening. There were thousands of motorbikes weaving through the streets, horns honking, people shouting, neon signs glowing in a language I couldn't even begin to read. I took a taxi to a cheap guest house I had booked for my first 3 nights. It cost me $12 a night. When I got to the room, I locked the door, sat on the edge of the firm mattress, and listened to the chaos of the city outside my window. I was 8,000 miles away from everything I had ever known. I was 66 years old. I had less than $800 left in the world. And for a brief, terrifying moment, I put my face in my hands and wondered if I had just made the biggest, most irreversible mistake of my life. The first few days were a blur of intense culture shock and profound financial anxiety. Every time I bought a bottle of water or a bowl of soup, I was doing the math in my head, converting Vietnamese dong back into US dollars, watching my tiny safety net shrink. I was terrified of being ripped off. I was terrified of getting sick. I was terrified that the YouTube videos had lied to me and that I would soon find myself destitute in a foreign country. But if you are watching this video right now and you are sitting in your living room somewhere in the United States, feeling that exact same crushing weight of financial anxiety that I felt in that parking lot, I want to pause and tell you something very important. You are not trapped. The narrative that you have to suffer in silence, that you just have to accept a declining quality of life as you get older, is a lie. There are places in this world where your life experience is valued and where your modest retirement income can actually buy you peace. If sharing this raw, unfiltered reality helps even one of you realize that you still have options, then opening up about my struggles is completely worth it. If you relate to this, if you're tired of just surviving and want to start living again, please consider subscribing to the channel. We are building a community of people who refuse to give up on their golden years, and we would love to have you on this journey with us. By my 4th day in Da Nang, the initial panic started to subside, largely because I realized I couldn't afford to stay frozen in fear. I had to find a permanent place to live before my guest house money ran out. I had joined a few local expat groups on Facebook before I left, and I reached out to a local Vietnamese real estate agent. I was completely honest with him. I told him my budget was incredibly tight. I told him I couldn't afford the luxury high-rises by the beach that most foreigners wanted. I just needed something clean, safe, and affordable. The next morning, he picked me up on his motorbike. I had never ridden on a motorbike before in my life, and clinging to the back of it while we merged into a river of thousands of other scooters was absolutely terrifying, but also strangely exhilarating. He drove me away from the tourist areas, deep into a local Vietnamese neighborhood. The streets were narrower here. There were no English signs, no fancy coffee shops, just local life unfolding in vibrant, chaotic beauty. Women were selling fresh vegetables on the sidewalks, children were playing in the alleyways, and the smell of roasting pork and strong coffee filled the air. He pulled up to a tall, narrow building tucked down a quiet alley. We walked up 3 flights of stairs, and he unlocked a door. I didn't know what to expect. Given my budget, I was bracing myself for a dark, cramped room. But when he pushed the door open, My jaw actually dropped. Let me walk you through what $280 a month actually buys you in Vietnam. The apartment is a large, open-concept studio. The floors are covered in these beautiful, cool, white ceramic tiles that feel amazing on your bare feet after walking outside in the tropical heat. But the first thing that hit me was the light. The entire far wall is made of floor-to-ceiling glass sliding doors that open up onto a private balcony. That balcony looks out over the neighborhood rooftops, and in the distance I can actually see the lush green mountains that surround the city. The kitchen isn't massive, but it's completely modern. It has a two-burner induction stove, a large refrigerator, a microwave, and beautiful stone countertops. The agent explained that the $280 didn't just cover the rent. It included high-speed fiber optic internet, water, garbage collection, and a cleaning service that comes to my apartment twice a week to sweep, mop, and change my bed linens. The only thing I have to pay for separately is electricity, which usually runs me about $30 a month, even with the air conditioning running at night. I stood in the middle of that apartment, looking out at the mountains, and I felt a physical sensation in my chest. It felt like a massive, heavy iron band that had been wrapped around my ribs for the last 5 years suddenly snapped and fell away. I could breathe. I did the math in my head. My Social Security check was around $1,400 a month. Back in Florida, that meant starvation. Here, in this beautiful sunlit apartment, it meant absolute financial freedom. I moved in that very afternoon. And that is when the real transformation began. When you remove the constant, suffocating pressure of financial ruin from your life, your brain actually changes. You stop walking through the world in a state of defense. You start looking up. You start noticing the details. You start actually living. I had been so terrified of the culture shock, but what nobody tells you about Vietnam is the overwhelming, almost aggressive kindness of the local people. About 2 weeks after I moved in, I had what I thought was a disaster. I had walked to a local market about a mile away to buy some fruit, and on the way back it started to rain. Not a gentle drizzle, but a torrential, blinding tropical downpour. I was soaked to the bone in seconds. I tried to hurry back, but I slipped on the wet pavement and fell hard, twisting my ankle and dropping my bags of groceries into the flooded street. I was sitting on the ground in the pouring rain, my ankle throbbing, my groceries ruined, feeling incredibly old and incredibly foolish. I thought about how, in America, cars would probably just drive past me, or people might stare from their windows without getting involved. But before I could even try to stand up, 3 local people ran out of a small mechanic's shop across the street. They didn't hesitate. One man grabbed me under the arms and hoisted me up. A young woman grabbed an umbrella to cover me, completely ignoring the fact that she was getting soaked herself. Another man picked up my scattered fruit and put it back in the bags. They brought me into their shop, sat me down on a plastic chair, and gave me a dry towel. They didn't speak a word of English, and I still didn't know enough Vietnamese to explain myself, but the language barrier didn't matter. The woman brought me a small cup of hot, sweet tea. The mechanic gently checked my ankle, gesturing to ask if it was broken. When I shook my head that it was just a sprain, he smiled, patted my shoulder, and then insisted on driving me all the way back to my apartment on his motorbike, holding the umbrella over me the entire way. When he dropped me off, I tried to hand him a 200,000 dong note, about $8, to thank him for his trouble. He looked at the money, looked at me, shook his head vigorously, pushed my hand away, and gave me a warm smile. He pointed at his chest, then at me, and just said, "Friend." I walked upstairs to my $280 apartment, locked the door, sat on my bed, and for the first time in years, I cried. I didn't cry because my ankle hurt, and I didn't cry because I was lonely. I cried because I was so profoundly overwhelmed by the humanity of it all. I had come to this country with $800, expecting to be an outcast, expecting to struggle, expecting to be treated like a poor foreigner. Instead, I was treated with a level of dignity and respect that I had completely forgotten existed. It has been over a year since I sat in that sweltering parking lot in Florida, looking at my bank account and feeling like my life was essentially over. My life today is unrecognizable from the man I was back then. My mornings don't start with dread anymore. I usually wake up around 6 when the neighborhood starts coming alive. I make a cup of strong Vietnamese coffee, step out onto my balcony, and watch the sun come up over the rooftops. I walk down to the local market every single day. I know the vendors now. I know the woman who sells the best mangoes. I know the guy who makes the incredible banh mi sandwiches on the corner for $1.50. I spend my afternoons reading, taking long walks by the Han River, or meeting up with other expats at a local cafe to drink iced coffee and talk about our lives. My total monthly expenses, including this beautiful apartment, eating out for almost every meal, my electricity, my phone plan, and occasional travel to nearby beach towns, rarely exceeds $900. I actually put money into a savings account every month. For the first time in my adult life, my net worth is slowly growing rather than shrinking, even though I am not working a single hour. But I want to be incredibly clear about something. Moving to a country like Vietnam with very little money is not a magic cure-all, and it is not a luxury vacation. If you come here expecting everything to operate exactly like it does in the United States, you will be miserable. The traffic is chaotic. The sidewalks are uneven. You will occasionally see things that challenge your Western sensibilities. The summer heat can be absolutely brutal, and dealing with visa renewals and foreign bureaucracy requires a level of patience that most Americans simply do not possess. You have to be willing to let go of control. You have to be willing to accept that things will go wrong, that the internet might drop out during a storm, that you might get a stomach bug from eating street food, and that you will spend a lot of time feeling confused. You have to trade the sterile predictability of an American suburb for the raw, noisy, unpredictable pulse of Southeast Asia. But if you can make that mental shift, what you gain in return is something that money simply cannot buy in the West anymore. You gain your dignity back. In America, when you run out of money, you lose your social standing. You become invisible. You become a problem to be solved, or worse, you become someone that society simply prefers not to look at. Aging without wealth in the United States is one of the most isolating, punishing experiences a human being can go through. Here, my gray hair is a badge of respect. When I walk into a restaurant, I am treated with deference. When I walk down the street, young people nod to me. I am not judged by the car I drive, because I don't own one, or the clothes I wear. I am judged by the way I treat the people around me. I am a part of a community. I look back at that guy sitting in the car with $800, and I wish I could reach back through time and put a hand on his shoulder. I wish I could tell him that the number on his banking app did not dictate the value of his life. I wish I could tell him that the terrifying leap he was about to take would end up being the greatest adventure he would ever experience. We are conditioned to believe that retirement requires millions of dollars in a 401k, a paid-off mortgage, and a comprehensive estate plan. And yes, if you have those things, congratulations, you have won the American game. But if you don't have those things, if you are sitting at your kitchen table right now looking at a stack of bills and a Social Security check that simply doesn't cover the math, I want you to hear this loud and clear. The game is not over. You just need to change the board you are playing on. I left the United States with only $800 in my pocket. I left behind a life of fear, isolation, and financial ruin. And what I found on the other side of the world wasn't just an affordable apartment. I found a place where I could finally breathe. I found a place where I could finally rest. I found a home. The hardest part wasn't the 24-hour flight, and it wasn't the language barrier, and it wasn't the spicy food. The hardest part was simply finding the courage to buy the ticket. If I can do it at 66 years old, with almost nothing to my name, I promise you, you can do it too. Take a deep breath, look at your options, and remember that you deserve to live these years with peace. You just have to be brave enough to go find it.